Good morning, welcome to the attic. Bit noisy this morning, it's spring, there's birds nesting in my roof, so if you can hear squawking, that's what it is. Been a wet and windy couple of weeks here in the forest, not a lot of photography going on. The dry days we've mostly been climbing, which has involved a fair amount of falling off things and occasionally getting to the top of things. What it's also meant is that I've had a chance to play with Photoshop's latest new feature. So last week they rolled out an update to their neural filters. Most interesting of which is the depth blur tool. Now, Photoshop rolled out neural filters back in October last year, and it seemed like a lot of fun with a lot of potential. At the time, the most interesting stuff was probably being able to add really weird smiles to people or to make people look older. And beyond that, yeah, nothing really groundbreaking, but yeah, a lot of potential. This time around, Adobe Sensei, the machine learning technology, has really made significant changes to its ability to depth map, so figure out how far away something is in your photograph. Now, Piximperfect did a really interesting video on this, which I wrote about briefly for F-Stoppers last week, and yeah, it's obviously a work in progress. The results are a bit hit and miss, and well, yeah, there's potential there, but it's difficult to see it because the results at the moment can be quite poor. So Adobe Sensei works. All of these neural filters use Adobe Sensei. It takes your photo, uploads it to the cloud, and then it uses Adobe Sensei's machine learning to figure out what is happening in your photograph to be able to make some changes. For example, making someone look older, giving them a really weird smile. It's quite slow, and yeah, hit and miss results for the most part. I played briefly with some of the depth mapping potential with the last update. I like photographing fog in forests, and I was wondering, how easy it would be to recreate fog. Not because I want to recreate fog, but just to see what could be achieved. And yeah, the results weren't great. If you can imagine, a dense photograph of trees has loads of different distances, and also the haze that it was creating just didn't seem to be particularly realistic. So this update, Depth Blur, it replicates a shallow depth of field. So you could shoot at f5.6 on a 85mm lens and maybe get something that looks closer to f1.8. The results are hit and miss. This is very much beta, and it's interesting, why is Adobe releasing something that clearly doesn't work so well? Well, very simply, this system works using machine learning, and Adobe needs Adobe Sensei to do exactly that. It needs to do some machine learning. So every time you use the tool, Photoshop will ask you if it was any good, and you can let it know, and it will learn from every process. So I thought I'd give this a go with a photograph of Stefan that I took a couple of months ago. I took one photograph at f1.8 and I took another photograph at f5.6, and I looked to see what depth blur could do to the version shot at f5.6, and this is the result. So the background is fairly comparable, but you can see it's really struggled, the transition. So if you imagine, depth mapping is trying to figure out how far everything is away from the camera. If you've got a series of distinct layers that the Adobe Sensei can identify, that's going to be fairly straightforward. But if you've got this continuous texture that extends into the distance, especially if that texture is quite complicated, it's going to struggle, and you can see what's happened there. It's pretty poor. So maybe this wasn't the best example to attempt. I had to go at something that was shot at a much much smaller depth of field. So this was shot at around, I think, f7.1, and yeah, you can kind of see that the mountains in the background are now more blurred. It's struggled with the feet, weirdly. I don't know what's going on down there. And you can see that there's a little bit of fringing going on the back of the hand. If we have a look at a cropped in version here, it's really struggled. And what's nice about the filter is that you can actually, it creates a new layer, obviously non-destructive, as you'd expect from Photoshop these days. And you can see what it's created that then sits on top of the original image. So yeah, still not great results. A lot of weird stuff happening there, but again, beta version, Photoshop wants your feedback, it needs to learn. I had one more go, two more goes, photograph shot on a 35mm lens at f2.8, and I thought, well, the distinction between foreground and background here is quite obvious, so what happens in this instance? And suddenly f2.8 looks a lot more like f1.8 or beyond. It still seems to struggle. There are parts where, yeah, it's clearly not doing a good job. But what's interesting is that it seems to do better when you've taken a photograph that's been shot at, say, a reasonably shallow depth of field and then try to use the depth blur filter to replicate an even shallower depth of field. So for two reasons. For one, any areas where there is a sharp distinction between foreground and background, it can figure out the difference better. And also, as you get that drop off from in focus to out of focus, it will just exaggerate it, hopefully, and actually create some nice results. So this is shot on an 85mm lens at f1.8, and you can see that it's made the background a lot creamier, a lot blurrier, and actually the transition isn't too bad. The shoulder again is struggling a bit, but the hair, if you look on this side of the head, actually there's before, there's after. There doesn't seem to be any degradation to the sharpness of this image. What's interesting is that it actually does some weird things. I can't figure out why it's created some areas over the eyes, but that's what Photoshop has created as a result of running depth blur, kind of this weird mesh of bits that it's turned into blobs and overlaid. But yeah, not bad results. So it kind of got me thinking, in time, is this going to change how we take photographs? If you don't need to have an f1.2, f1.4 lens that's going to cost you a lot of money, could you shoot at f1.8 and just rely on Photoshop to do the rest with a couple of clicks? Could you see in 5-10 years a Lightroom feature where you shoot at f1.8 or maybe f2.8 and then you just decide, oh, Lightroom, can you make this look a bit more like f1.2? And you just click a button, it takes a few moments, and suddenly you've got really shallow depth of field. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. I'm excited to see how this develops. I got a tweet from one of the developers at Adobe saying, yeah, please, it's not perfect. This is beta. We are rolling it out. Keep giving us your feedback so that the machine can keep on learning. So obviously that is Adobe's intention at the moment. And you can only imagine that this technology is going to improve. So let me know what you think. Is this going to change the way that we take photographs? Does it have potential? Have you played with it? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Of course, if you like this video, drop me a like, give me a subscription, leave a comment, all the rest, blah, blah, blah. Thanks for watching. See you next time.